Welcome to the danger zone. The places where nature strikes again and again. Those who reside here know that tragedy will come. Sooner or later, it always does.
Boys up there, get out now!
This is a story of fire and ice and flood. Of elemental forces that can't be stopped. The terrors that confront those who live and work in harm's way. The Swiss Alps, a paradise with jagged edges. For some, it's a winter playground. But this alpine terrain has hidden dangers. One February afternoon, Catherine Perret and Ivo Weimann were out skiing.
This is an area we are very familiar with. We never thought there was any danger. But then we noticed that as the hills got steeper, the snow wasn't holding. At that point, we knew that something wasn't the way it should be.
High up in the hills, it began. And before they heard anything, it was upon them.
I turned around to see where Catherine was, and there was no trace, nothing.
Catherine!
Fearing the worst, Ivo decided to go for help, not knowing Catherine's fate. In fact, she had been buried alive. Most victims die if they aren't found within the first half hour. And the hours were slipping by.
I had two options, either to keep panicking and therefore die, or else work with the little bit I had and maybe have a chance.
One of Catherine's hands was free, but as she scratched at the snow, she started to lose hope.
I told myself, you'll never make it. You're going to die now.
Finally, she could reach through the surface, and she heard a noise.
You don't believe it. There have been too many emotions, too much fear, too much hope, too much despair before that. It's overwhelming.
As the rescuers dug down, they were amazed to find that she was still alive after 5 hours buried in the snow. Catherine was lucky. She came face to face with one of the deadliest forces in nature and survived. Others have not been so fortunate. They call it the White Death. All over the world, from New Zealand to Nepal, avalanches strike suddenly and without warning. Around the globe, it's estimated that 1 million avalanches fall every year. The snowpack on a mountainside gathers in layers, and the strength of each layer depends on temperature, wind, the angle of the slope. When a strong layer sits on top of a weaker one, any sudden change or disturbance can trigger a slide. A great wave or slab of snow can rumble downhill with tons of force. And the results can be tragic. Hundreds die each year in avalanches around the world. When the snows melted in Nepal in 1996, it was revealed that scores had died in one of the worst winters on record. But of all the countries pounded by avalanches, Switzerland is among the hardest hit. It looks like a movie set, serene and calm. But these hills are alive. Spring and summer hide a secret. Because when fall and winter arrive, so do the snows and the avalanches. Some 17,000 a year. The record of snowslides here goes back to the 3rd century BC, when Hannibal crossed the Alps. For 2,200 years, it's been a battle of man versus the avalanche. But recently the problem has grown as more people have chosen to move up into the mountains. In Switzerland, thousands of residents live in towns within the so-called red zones. One such village is Andermatt. In the 1950s, Andermatt, like much of Switzerland, was buried in a terrible series of avalanches. And yet, over the coming decades, more and more people came to live and play there, transforming Andermatt into a major resort destination, despite the potential menace. Walter Huber was 16 in 1975. His family had been living in this house for years. Little did they know that disaster was looming just above them on the hillside. When the snows came that winter, the house was engulfed.
In one day and one night, we had an accumulation of 6 feet of new snow, and my sister and I went out to shovel the path in front of the house. When I turned around, I saw a cloud of powdered snow, and at that moment it was clear to me it was an avalanche. There was a big bang coming from the other side of the house, and all the windows broke from the pressure. And then the chaos with the trees and the snow, and my sister, who was nowhere to be found.
In that one terrible moment, his sister Rita's life was snuffed out. In spite of the Huber family's tragic loss, they never left. Today, more than 20 years later, Walter and his family still live in the same house. Day in, day out, his children still walk the very same path where his sister died. There are many such tragedies around the globe. When disaster strikes, the world looks to one place above all for answers: the town of Davos, the Swiss Federal Avalanche Institute. The Institute is the world's leading authority on snow and all things avalanche-related. Inside, scientists are at work, charting dangerous regions and issuing warnings. Snow is not a uniform substance. In fact, it's one of the most complex materials in nature. In a special sub-zero cold room, the scientists study crystal size, density, weight, anything that will give them some clue to how different types of snow will react to stress. There are many potential solutions to the avalanche problem. The Institute is studying several, like protective structures of wood and steel. For while nothing will stop an avalanche, it is possible to dissipate its energy. Following the great avalanches of the 1950s, Switzerland began building these barriers to protect its towns. In the past 4 decades, they have erected some 300 miles of barricades, about 1.5 times the width of the entire country.
Those barriers play a very important protective role. Without them, a safe life would be virtually impossible because in many places there is no natural protection against avalanches.
While it's possible to protect towns, it's harder to safeguard individual skiers when they head off the beaten path. Silent and powerful, avalanches tumble down to pick off many an unsuspecting backcountry sportsman. The Swiss are constantly researching the best ways to hunt for avalanche victims. Some are tried and true methods that have been used for hundreds of years. Search dogs, shovels, probes. The Institute trains ski patrols in their application. But other methods are more high-tech, more modern. Like a beeper. A small radio transmitter given to each skier. The transmitters can also be switched to receive the signal and close in on the victim. Around the world, from Vail, Colorado to Nagaro, Japan, these beepers are becoming standard issue for backcountry skiers. The most recent safety invention is the ABS, the Avalanche Balloon System.
We performed tests with the avalanches. We took dummies which corresponded to the approximate weight of a human being. We put them into an avalanche with and without balloons in order to draw comparisons, and then we triggered the avalanche. The result was that all of the dummies with balloons remained on the surface, or close to the surface. Almost all of the dummies without balloons were buried.
But these are all just ways to respond when an avalanche strikes. Sometimes you have to take action earlier. Sometimes you have to create avalanches in order to prevent them. And that's the job of the Davos Mountain Patrol. They search out trouble spots where snow buildup and rising temperatures have created hidden fractures or weakened layers. And then they go to work. Explosions trigger controlled avalanches before they can turn deadly. But the research and the preventive measures don't always work. Sometimes people do exactly what the Institute recommends, and still they get caught, swept up in nature's wrath. That was the case in 1984, when the town of DeSantis was hit by a major avalanche. Wiener Hurlemann and his family were there on vacation when disaster struck.
My house was here. Over to the left, there was a gate by those trees. It started over by the bench, and then just a little farther than the hill. That was the location of the house. We had extreme conditions. It was snowing non-stop, and overnight we had a storm. So we got a lot of snow, and probably high up in the mountains it was even worse. It was very dangerous. We had a funny feeling. We knew that something was going to happen. And all of a sudden, it was dark, and heavy winds came up, just like a storm. We saw it before we heard it. It was like an air bombing attack, like a hurricane. Everything shook, things flew around. It was a tremendous sound. And then my wife and my mother said, "Now it's coming." So we ducked to the ground. We all stayed in the third of the house, still standing. The rest was gone, totally destroyed.
For all the devastation, Hurleman and his family were lucky. They got out alive. But some of their neighbors were not so fortunate. They were crushed in the avalanche. Over the centuries, residents of the Alps have learned the hard way that winter can take its toll here in the mountains. But when winter turns to summer, you'd think the trouble would be over. Not in Switzerland. For here in the shadow of the glaciers, the Swiss, amazingly, face warm weather avalanches. Great ice and rock slides, triggered as the glaciers melt and become destabilized. And in Grindelwald, where winter and summer collide, that can spell trouble.
Last September, an ice avalanche with about 200,000 cubic meters of ice crashed down this cliff. This dry avalanche went quite a bit further than the snow deposits, which we can see now, and the street was partially buried.
As the glacier rumbled to life, great chunks of ice came hurtling down the slopes, carrying rocks and boulders in their path. It would be one of the most destructive summer avalanches in years. The warm months may hold their terrors, but they're also a crucial time in the battle to control avalanches. For in the struggle against nature, nature itself provides the perfect tool: trees. Since the Middle Ages, the people of Switzerland have been planting trees to protect their towns. All the work that's being done in Davos has emphasized one thing: that it's these surprisingly low-tech solutions and quiet heroes who can make all the difference. The simple group of trees you can barely see in summer provides the essential protection that allows a town like Andermatt to exist. For summer will turn to winter, the snows will build, and the trees will stand as a wedge against nature's rage. Against the threat that always returns. For those who live in the danger zone. Of course, it's not just snow that can bury a town. So too can sand or dust, 1 million tiny grains born on the wind. It was called Black Sunday. On April 14th, 1935, a dark blizzard struck America's Great Plains, rolling across the land. It churned in from Colorado, through Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. A huge dust storm with winds of up to 60 miles an hour, swallowing towns in total darkness. A darkness that would turn the heart of a nation into a dust bowl. Rain is the lifeblood of the planet. But when the rains stop, trouble begins. In drought-stricken lands, the soil turns to dust. When the winds blow, a chain reaction begins. And a black roller is born. A terrible vortex breaking like a dark wave over the land. A large dust storm can be 300 miles in diameter and carry 100 million tons of soil into the air. And they can strike almost any continent on Earth. This was the scene in Melbourne, Australia in 1983, after a particularly dry summer.
Rail and road traffic was thrown into chaos, and the city's 3 airports closed as the dust swirled in choking clouds. Much of the land denuded of soil this summer won't recover completely in this generation, if ever.
All across Africa, Australia, and the Americas, these clouds of dust and sand have left their mark. Some are so massive they can even be seen from outer space, blanketing the Earth, covering the sky. But as suffocating as sand and dust storms can be, nothing matches the deadly potential of fire. Flame and smoke, and the terrible beauty of the blaze.
You know, it's a living and breathing thing. Sounds like a train's coming just real quick, you know, like a whoosh.
Sparks are flying everywhere, and you don't realize how panicked you're going to be.
It's a deadly combination of heat, fuel, and oxygen. Add a spark, and it comes to life. This is not just any fire, it's wildfire. When flames go rampaging across the countryside, burning out of control. All around the world, the conditions that create the monster wildfires are the same. Dry land and vegetation, with too much wind and not enough water. When summer approaches, it turns parched, brown, a tinderbox. Across the planet, millions live in these high-risk fire regions. Drought has made Australia the world's most fire-prone country. In Greece, the arid scrubland can burst into flame. But one area that has had more than its share of wildfire is Southern California. This region was built up from a desert, and it was built to burn. As people construct homes in such precarious locations, they've transformed this into the busiest fire district in the United States. Nearly 2,000 fires strike each year. Some are backyard flare-ups. Some the work of carelessly tossed cigarettes. And some are just plain arson. Lightning also causes fires, 20 a day in the US alone. In the fight against wildfires, surprisingly little has changed over the last few decades. It remains hand-to-hand combat with a deadly killer. Those who dare to walk among the flames still use much of the same basic equipment: hoses, axes, and pumper trucks churning out gallons of water to fight the blaze. And the battle plan is still the same as well. They confront it with water, clear-cut brush, even set small fires to burn out a path and stop the progress of the flame. Recently, Southern California unveiled the newest tactical weapon in the battle against wildfires. A rapid deployment force called Helitack designed to be first on the fire lines. Start with a modified military chopper, capable of speeding to the scene at 140 miles per hour. Add a Bambi bucket, able to carry 300 gallons of water to the heart of the fire. Throw in the helitack crew, and you're ready for action. When the call goes out, they have only 10 minutes to get on their gear and get into the air.
When we're getting dressed before we go out, I start thinking about where it's going to be and you know, hoping that everything turns out good and that we're all safe. We all make it back, you know, without any injuries or any problems.
They are an elite squad, braving death day after day as they respond to over 100 fires a year. Some have fallen in the line of duty. Many have been cited for heroism. Where do they come from? Astonishingly, they're all convicts. Non-violent offenders from the state prison system.
I trust them with my life. I'm out there and we screw up and I got to get them out and they got to get me out.
This morning, they've been called to handle a blaze in the Chino Hills region. They are 8 inmates, 2 captains and a pilot, an experienced team, and yet the fear is always there. For as any firefighter knows, you can never be sure when you get to the scene what you're going to find. Approaching the blaze from the upwind side, the team puts down a few hundred feet away. Luckily, they've arrived early. It's not a huge fire yet, just burning scrub brush. But wildfires are unpredictable. And if they don't catch it quickly, even the smallest blaze could turn deadly. A frontal assault with the hoses, a few water drops, and the fire is on the run. Now the crew can start hacking out the trenches.
We're like the army, you know, I mean, that's just the bottom line. And the fire is the enemy, so we come to attack it, and that's what we've been doing.
Within less than an hour, the blaze is extinguished, stamped out before it ever had a chance to spread. And the team can head back. This was a small fire. Around the world, as people have encroached farther and farther into dry wilderness areas, the consequences have been worse, much worse. In 1994, Sydney, Australia was hit by a monster blaze. It would sweep across nearly 1.5 million acres.
The fire's up there! Get out now!
In October of 1991, Northern California was devastated when a dry east wind blew embers across Oakland and the hills of Berkeley. The flames spread quickly from wilderness to suburbia, and sheer panic set in.
All right. Evacuation. Is it on the right channel? Yeah.
At moments, both Australia and Oakland would confront the most terrible phenomenon of all: a firestorm, an intense whirlwind of flame. It's what happens when fire feeds on fire and a blaze goes ballistic. Convection currents become so strong, the inferno creates its own weather patterns. A firestorm can be 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit and move at 100 miles an hour. It's an explosive blast of pure flame. In 1989, Jim Scale set out to fight a small fire and got caught in the middle of a firestorm. In this video, he was in the next to last truck heading south on Route 395 when the unthinkable happened.
You know,
know, the footage in The Wizard of Oz when the house is tossed up and thrown around in there? That's exactly what it was like, except for with fire embers and whole bushes being tossed around with you.
A wall of flame, 120 feet high, shot across the highway at 100 miles an hour. Scales, in the truck on the left, found himself engulfed in the middle of a firestorm.
It was there in seconds. Came across the highway on us. I had second degree over my entire face, and you know, your thought is, do I have a nose still? Do I have an ear still? What have I done? Where do we go from here? Who's going to take care of my family? All that type of stuff runs through your mind. Well, the fire burned through, and it ran into an unburned area, and we were able to get up to the highway. We were given first aid there by the rest of the strike team. We have a saying around our station. We call it shaking hands with the devil. As I'm living proof, sometimes you don't turn your back on the devil, and that's quite obvious.
In 1996, it happened again, one of the worst fire seasons on record. In October of that year, the entire state of California seemed to be on fire. It was one of the worst series of blazes in recent memory, and Carlsbad was the center of the action.
The fire was whipping, like almost in a tornado fashion, and the wind was really blowing hard. And
fire, no one can tell which way it's going to go, but you just hear just the wind, a lot of cracking and popping.
My son is in the car screaming, you know, "We got to go, Mom, we got to go, we got to go." It was too ferocious to not get out.
Firemen responded to the call, driving into the inferno. It was a full-scale war as the blaze burned out of control, unstoppable. Every weapon in the arsenal was called in. More than 1,000 firefighters, tankers dropping fire retardant, as 8,700 acres began to burn. And once again, the heli-tac team was called into action. On the ground and in the air, they battled the blaze all day and into the night.
Your adrenaline starts pumping, you know, and you just think you got to do something, just do it and just get out of here.
Devours property, land, homes, whatever it's in its way, you know, that's fuel. And we have to stop it, you know, it's a monster.
After 2.5 days, they finally started to beat the fire back.
We stopped it in some places, and some places it overran us, you know. Like, you know, most firefighters know that a fire, it has a mind of its own. Been working here like 3 days now, you know, just doing the best we can to eliminate this monster. It's a monster. I mean, it's devastating.
My heart goes out to them, you know. For them to come home and find nothing there, that's probably one of the saddest feelings. You know, we try. Just Mother Nature is going to have her way sometimes.
By the 4th day, they had succeeded in putting out the blaze. The squad had saved some 200 homes. Still, they couldn't save them all. 101 houses were destroyed in this once affluent San Diego suburb. Tragedy hit home for people like Nancy and James Weiss.
We just took photographs. I took my grandmother's quilt. My son took his school books and his college applications. That was it. You know, didn't know what to do. Just knew that there was no way that this was going to survive. 26 years of memories in a house.
But I think it was cookware. A lot.
It's pieces of your life that, you know, you no longer have. This is like nothing you can imagine, though.
But amazingly, on this ruined street, one house survived it all.
I feel fortunate and blessed. It's like there was an angel with their arms around the house, and that's probably an apt way of describing it.
In residential communities, fires almost always spread with sparks carried on the wind from rooftop to rooftop. Although experts recommend tile roofs for everyone who lives in a fire zone, this was the only house here that actually had one. And it made the difference.
All the houses are gone. It's all family tragedy. It's devastating, really. I mean, these people were all my friends. It's, you know, you can't be happy. I mean, you can just be thankful. It's a very mixed emotion. It's hard to talk about. So.
But on one topic at least, there are no mixed emotions about the people who rescued his home.
The fire department saved this house. They got here when they had something to work with. I think they're more than heroes because, I mean, you know, usually when you read about heroes, it's somebody who is in a situation that happens while they're there. I mean, these guys walk into it.
Some might say it takes a band of criminals to walk into hell and back. But in the heat of the fire, these men have been transformed from convicts into heroes.
We even heard cheers when we unloaded on the helicopter. I remember reading a little note from some little girl that said, "Thank you, Mr. Fireman. If you wasn't here, something bad would happen." And I mean, it just touched my heart, you know, because we all have kids, and just to, you know, to know that a little girl has that kind of love and it gives you extra plus. It's just knowing that we're helping someone.
The Helitack team must continue its valiant efforts, for the fires will keep coming. Homeowners won't stop building in perilous locations. And as long as they do, they'll face disaster, and not just from fire. All around the world, on the banks of flowing rivers, people find tranquility, calm, enduring vistas. It may seem hard to believe, but once again, they're building in the danger zone. In recent years, it has seemed as if the waters are rising. Each year, the floods keep coming, floods of biblical proportions. The rain brings raging torrents, destroying villages and towns in Canada, Italy, China, leaving millions homeless and thousands dead. Buildings, cities, entire lives washed away and carried downstream. In the first few days of 1997, disaster struck the city of Sacramento, California. On New Year's Day, the rain started and they didn't stop. A 3-day storm dumped a record downpour, 2 to 3 feet. The dams couldn't hold back the raging waters. Overburdened, the levees began to give way. Those who lived nearby would barely escape.
A car stopped in front of my house and started screaming, "Water's coming," and the levee broke. I heard a roar, and I wondered what it was. That it's something I'll never forget. It was sound like Niagara Falls. Going out through that looked like an ocean. It's sad, really sad.
As the floodwaters mounted, they swept away everything in their path. Highways turned into waterways, and the land was swallowed up. In the flooding, 120,000 people were forced out of their homes. Farms, houses, and crops were destroyed. The damage would reach an estimated $2 billion, making it the most costly deluge in California history.
Oh, we've lost everything we have, but I was 2 minutes, I could have not been here, so I feel real lucky.
The city was in a state of emergency for days. Many neighborhoods were destroyed. At Riverdale Mobile Home Park, most got out, but the damage was brutal.
I never left. These guys made me sign a waiver to notify my next of kin. About 3.5, 4 feet. Up there.
In the wake of the storms, the thousands left homeless came to shelters to ride out the next few days.
I got word this morning that the water is up to the eaves on my house. I didn't realize it would get that high, but we only lived maybe 2 miles from where the levee broke. It's scary. We just had the house built in '86 after the last flood. So I guess we'll start over again.
But when the rain stopped, the threat did not end. The waterways were now swollen and powerful, and levees up and down the river were being washed away. Levees are a universal solution to flood control. From Holland to China, everywhere people build in the floodplains, they erect these barriers to tame rivers and force them into channels. But by its very nature, the system cuts off the natural spillways, raising the river's pressure. And as flood control experts say, there are only 2 kinds of levees, those that have broken and those that will. That's what was happening in Northern California. This part of the Central Valley was a web of rivers and waterways, controlled by more than 5,000 miles of levees. And one by one, the levees began to collapse. But the people of Sacramento would not give up. They began to fight back, trying to shore up the damaged embankments. At the town of Meridian, the sandbagging was underway in earnest.
Levee broke about 1 mile this side of it into this area here, and this water's backing up from that hole.
Get another guy in the middle rolling.
The fabric material prevents the waves from washing the loose fill dirt away from this temporary levee. This was just put in the last 36 hours. And they built it specifically for saving this town.
In the valley, the rains had ended, but over the coming days, they would return, and the Sierra Nevada snowpack continued to melt. The waters rose and spread out across 300 square miles. People were still evacuating, saving what they could, and the less fortunate ones took to the rooftops and waited for rescue. For them, the disaster seemed to be unfolding in slow motion. That's often the way with floods, as the water rises slowly and steadily. Of course, some floods happen fast. They're called flash floods, water's deadliest incarnation. They can strike anywhere there are brief, intense rains and narrow waterways. But slow or quick, the devastation is the same, and so too is the need for emergency rescue. Back in Sacramento, J.J. Moore of the Army National Guard wasn't supposed to be a hero. At least that's what his wife told him.
She told me, when you go
you know, don't be a hero. That's the last thing she asked me. And I said, okay, you know, I promise we'll be safe.
But as the disaster unfolded, J.J. Moore was called into action, dangling from a Black Hawk rescue copter. On the Cosumnes River, the waters were rising up to 12 feet high, and right in the middle was a stranded motorist.
I could see the guy. He was really scared, really frantic, and I could see that he was going to jump at me. So when we got to him, I'm trying to tell him, don't jump, you know, stay right there.
Surrounded by trees and barbed wire, J.J. tried to swing his charge to dry land. But he was slipping away. One last effort. For this lucky motorist, it was a narrow escape. In Sacramento, the first days of 1997 were producing the biggest flood Northern Californians had seen in this century. Yet over the years, flood disasters elsewhere have been far worse. For Americans, the touchstone had always been the Johnstown, Pennsylvania flood. In May of 1889, heavy rains led to the collapse of a 70-foot earthen dam, and a liquid avalanche crushed the city. The entire downtown was washed away in less than 10 minutes. Through the 1920s and 30s, the rains came once more, and Johnstown was inundated again and again. These floods killed thousands, yet even they were small indeed compared to the ones that struck China. All through the early 1900s, great torrents swept across the Yangtze Valley. One of the most catastrophic floods of our century occurred in 1931, when the Yangtze and Huanghe jumped their banks and killed 225,000 people. China's landscape, great rivers crashing down onto broad plains, continues to be a recipe for disaster. Historically, floods come to the same areas over and over. The floodplains are the river's domain. It's a simple matter of topography, the shape of the land, and the land knows no compassion. But there is, ironically, something about these tragedies that always seems to bring out the best in people. As the floods rolled on in Sacramento, the local residents were pitching in to help their neighbors. At places like the local Red Cross shelters, well over 1,000 volunteers showed up to feed and care for the refugees. While the human death toll was surprisingly low, there were other victims. Many animals in the Sacramento area were lost to the power of the floodwaters. Stranded on their own, they had nowhere to turn.
Seeing all the animals dying, it's mass death out there. They can only swim so long and keep their head above water.
The animals were falling by the thousands, but local residents answered the call. Chuck Stewart, a farmer, encountered his own share of tragedy. He lost 13 horses, his dog, his home. And yet, on the day after the floods, Chuck was still out there saving other people's beloved pets and livestock.
The first day is the time you got to be there. They can tread water for a while. The second day, you're only going to get a partial. The third day, you might as well not go out there. There's nothing going to be alive.
Working through the long hours, Chuck and his neighbors were able to save hundreds of animals.
There's some stuff up floating out there.
And as they were saved, they were brought here to the Placer County Fairgrounds in Roseville. An emergency station set up to house them. Spearheading the endeavor was Terry Crisp, who had been honored by Reader's Digest for her past efforts at animal rescue.
We've already been getting lots of reports of whole herds of cattle that were washed away. And we won't know the exact numbers until the water really starts to recede more than it is right now.
Let's take these two because there's dogs down here.
Okay, so this one will go in with... Well, we've been in full operation now for a day and a half, and the head count is somewhere up to about 175 animals. And continuing to arrive. Just got 10 goats, I think it is, and heard there's 40 head of cattle maybe heading this way, so we're going to be busy.
At Roseville and across the state, owners desperately searched for their pets.
These were together.
But perhaps the most incredible story was that of a dog named Rodeo. And the whole tale played out touchingly on the evening news. The 4-year-old border collie was trapped when a great wall of water washed him onto the roof. His owner, Jan Thompson, recalls.
I was just sick because I could see how far up it was. Because we have a 3-story house and it was up to the 3rd story.
Yet, in the middle of the torrent, Rodeo was alive.
And I just couldn't believe it. It was a miracle. It was kind of like a good thing happening in such a horrible thing. It was confused emotions at that time.
Rodeo had survived, but he was still in grave danger. And so Jan Thompson called the local television station to plead her case.
Got to help him. He's worked so hard to live. He has to get down from there.
And Channel 3 sent out a crew in their traffic chopper.
They risked their lives to get my dog, but they got him by the collar, and he lunged into the helicopter, and they slammed the door and took off as fast as they could. And the whole newsroom had a big burst of cheers that Rodeo was okay.
The town of Sacramento celebrated as they were reunited on camera. In the months that followed, Sacramento savored its lucky breaks and counted its losses. Billions of dollars in damages, 24,000 homes destroyed. Yet even as Northern California began to recover, all around the world there would be more floods. Central Europe was hit by its deadliest floods in 200 years. In Poland, Germany, and the Czech Republic, the rivers spilled over their banks, killing more than 100 people, leaving hundreds of thousands homeless. Some say that there will always be devastation as long as we keep building on floodplains. By relying on levees instead of simply giving rivers more room to breathe, we may be creating our own disasters. For the men and women who live side by side with the great rivers, there is always the danger that life-giving waters will turn deadly. For the truth is, nature cannot be tamed. This is the reality people will continue to face as long as they live in harm's way.